この番組はステートストリートインベストメントマネジメントの提供でお送りします。
こんにちは。今週も始まりました金曜日のゴールド、キャスターの佐藤美希です。近年安全資産として注目を集める金、ゴールドへの投資にスポットを当てて、さまざまな視点からその戦略的な価値を探ってまいります。さて、今回は特別企画をお送りします。金の国際的な調査機関であるワールドゴールドカウンシルで、中国を除くアジア太平洋地域責任者および中央銀行部門グローバル責任者を務めるシャオカイファンさんが先月来日しました。番組ではファンさんに単独インタビューを行いまして、日頃の活動や現在の金相場をどう捉えているかなど幅広くお話をお伺いしました。その貴重なインタビューを今週と来週の2回にわたってお届けします。では早速シャオカイファンさんへのインタビューをご覧いただきましょう。最初にワールドゴールドカウンシルの役割と近年力を入れている活動について伺いました。
The World Gold Council is a non-profit market development organization focused on enhancing and improving the global gold market. My role is I'm the global head of central banks, which means I talk to central banks around the world on any issue related to gold. I'm also the head of Asia Pacific ex-China, focused on market development in countries in our region. Absolutely. The first one is on building awareness, and that means reaching out to investors, from official sector investors to institutional investors, and also retail investors, on building more understanding of gold. The second pillar is focused on building trust, and that involves creating standards that govern the industry and also improving how the gold industry functions. The final pillar is on building access, and that means working with policymakers and governments to improve how gold is traded and to create more products for more investors to be able to access gold. So small-scale gold mining, also called artisanal small-scale gold mining, is a growing part of the gold supply chain, accounting for roughly 20% of new supply. Unfortunately, this part of the supply chain is often linked with various different issues and challenges. So we're working to help address those challenges through cooperation with governments and international partners, also by building more responsible buyers, including having central banks, for instance, play a bigger role in buying some of this artisanal small-scale gold production. There are various different challenges that these artisanal small-scale miners face. The first is that they often use destructive or dangerous practices in mining, including using toxic chemicals like mercury for gold extraction. The second is that they often have exploitive or at least abusive labor practices. Not all of them, but sometimes it includes that. And the third is that they often sell the gold into illicit or illegal supply chains where the gold ends up with criminals or terrorists. Our work is not trying to eliminate artisanal small-scale gold miners. It's trying to help them formalize and improve how they access gold. And so they can mine in a cleaner, more environmentally friendly way, and they can do so within the confines of the legal system, and then finally so that the gold they produce is sold to responsible buyers. And as you can imagine, with the gold price being so high right now, it's enticed more and more of this small-scale mining activity around the world, which means now is the time to focus more attention on solving this issue.
全体の 20% を占める小規模な金採掘業者への支援のお話がありましたが、このプログラムについてはファンさんも積極的に関わっているそうです。こうしたワールドゴールドカウンシルの3つの柱についてはまた来週詳しくお話をお伝えする予定です。では続いて近年高騰している金価格について伺いました。
It truly has been a spectacular year for gold, now on par with 1979 as one of the best performances annually for gold. I think there are a number of things driving this performance. One is that a lot of investors are moving into gold because of global uncertainty, because of policy instability, and also because of changes in monetary policy. So let me try to address those one by one. So first, at a global level, I think we're all aware of the challenges that are happening in our world right now from various wars and conflicts, and it does seem like that instability at a geopolitical level is not going to cease. And I think that that's been one reason why many investors are seeking refuge in gold, which has traditionally performed very well during periods of uncertainty. The second, on policy instability, I think a lot of the traditional ways that governments have been enacting policy is very different than before. It seems like policy can change very rapidly from one day to the next, and that's created a lot of uncertainty around international relations. I think that that's also a reason why many investors have moved to gold, because they want to mitigate risks from that type of instability. And the third point is on monetary policy changes. It seems like the Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world might be lowering interest rates soon. And generally speaking, lower interest rates are a good thing for the gold market because it reduces the opportunity cost for holding gold. Central banks have been a very big part of the gold market, but of course the central banks have been in the gold market for a long time, but the last 3 years have been extraordinarily high levels of gold buying, over 1,000 tons a year. I think that some of the main reasons include the geopolitical instability that I mentioned before. Of course, after the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's central bank reserves were frozen, and that might have changed how central banks think about political risk in their portfolios, with many of them choosing to add more gold as a result, because gold is ultimately an apolitical reserve asset. But there are other central banks who are buying gold for other reasons as well. We do an annual survey of central banks, which showed that the most highly cited reason for central banks to buy gold is how gold performs during periods of uncertainty. And as we all know, we're living through a very uncertain period right now. So I think many central banks are adding gold to build a little bit more resilience in their reserve portfolios. Yes, I think central banks will still be very large buyers of gold. They've bought over 1,000 tons of gold per year in the last 3 years. This year, as of the end of Q3, they will have bought about 650 tons, thereabouts or so. So it looks like they're still going to be very strong buyers of gold. And as I mentioned in our central bank survey, we actually asked this question, which is, do you plan to buy gold in the coming 12 months? And 43% of central banks said that they plan to buy gold, which is a record high in the years that we've done this survey. I expect central banks to still be very large buyers of gold. Ultimately, it's the emerging market central banks who are buying most of the gold, and their gold holdings as a percent of total reserves is still relatively low compared to the global average. So there's more room for them to add gold.
はい、各国の中央銀行による金の購入についてですが、アンケートに基づいて当面続くのではないかという見方でした。金価格への影響も大きいですので、今後も中銀の動向をしっかりと見ていきましょう。ではここで一旦 CM です。本日はワールドゴールドカウンシルシャオカイファンさんへの特別インタビューをお送りしています。続いては個人投資家について、特に日本の投資家への期待などを伺いました。
So that segment of the gold market has been performing exceptionally well. This year, they've actually accounted for the bulk of gold buying through either retail investors buying gold bars and coins, or through institutional investors and retail investors buying gold ETFs. So I think that that segment is likely to continue. Because of all those market factors that we discussed earlier, I think they'll still propel a lot more interest in gold going forward. It's roughly in line with the percent holdings that we see in other advanced Western countries, but compared to emerging market countries, it's relatively low. But I think one of the main differences we saw in that survey is that awareness and understanding of gold among Japanese investors remains a little bit lower than in other markets. So there's more work we can do to educate Japanese investors about the gold market. So Japanese investors are very important, and we've been seeing more and more demand for gold coming out of Japan specifically. I think some of the plans we have for this market include a lot more direct contact with investors, whether they're institutional investors, maybe even retail investors as well, putting out a lot more reports and information in Japanese so that it's available for the Japanese market to be able to read too. And just overall growing our presence in Japan by coming to Japan more often, and of course having a Tokyo office to be able to represent the World Gold Council in this market. Specifically for Japan, we think that this is a very important market. So we are planning to do a lot more outreach directly to investors in this market. We're also planning to offer a lot more of our research and data in Japanese so that it's more widely available to Japanese consumers. But most importantly, we've reopened our Tokyo office, which I think underscores our commitment to this market. We plan to have a permanent presence here going forward. You're right that the correlation between gold and stocks is generally very low. But if you look into more detail, you can see that when stocks perform very well, the correlation between gold and stocks can become positive, which means that gold can also go up while stocks go up. But when stocks perform very poorly, the correlation can become negative, which means that when stocks go down, gold actually might not go down or might go up, which is that safe haven aspect that you mentioned. And this is due to gold's unique nature as a financial asset. It has both pro-cyclical and counter-cyclical aspects, because there's a lot of optimism in financial markets, especially around things like artificial intelligence. And why we say gold can be pro-cyclical is there are pro-cyclical elements of gold demand, namely the jewelry part of gold demand and also gold use as a technological or industrial input. Those tend to go up when markets are also going up. So yes, the gold price has seen, an astounding rise this year, but also we did have a bit of a retracement in the last few days of October, which is honestly healthy behavior when the market moves up so quickly as well. I think that it's important to think about gold both in terms of the short-term performance, but also the long-term performance. In the short term, things like rate decisions by the Federal Reserve, they will impact gold. But in the long term, we need to think about these longer, more structural factors and whether those will change. And I think that from a long-term perspective, the fundamental reasons for why gold is an important asset class are going to continue. If some of those risks that you mentioned start to dematerialize, if there's a ceasefire in Ukraine, for instance, or if there's a breakthrough in the trade relationship between the US and China, yes, I do think that might bring some headwinds to the gold market. But fundamentally, we think that some of the long-term structural reasons for why gold is important are going to remain. And ultimately, I think that some of these risks are not going to change that much in the coming few years. If anything, we might see an intensification of geopolitical challenges. I think it's important for investors to understand how gold fits into a portfolio. Yes, its price performance has been astounding, but we like to think of gold as part of a component or basket inside a portfolio and how it might impact the overall portfolio performance. Generally speaking, adding more gold into a portfolio might improve the overall risk-adjusted returns. So I would ask investors to examine how gold might perform in relationship to the other assets in the portfolio. Well, I think that it's up to every individual's assessment of their risk level. Generally speaking, of course, we don't advocate for people to put 100% of their assets into gold. We think that gold can play an important role in a portfolio, but it's up to every individual to see how much gold is the right level of holdings that might improve the overall performance of the portfolio, including bringing things like more diversification into a portfolio, which gold can do very well.
ワールドゴールドカウンシルとしても日本での金への理解をさらに深めてもらうため情報提供をより充実させていきたいとのことでした。最後にファンさんからこれから金投資を始める方へのアドバイスもありましたけれども、こうした金をポートフォリオに加えることについての情報として活用していきたいと思います。来週も引き続きシャオカイファンさんへのインタビューをお送りしていきます。金曜日のゴールド、今週はこの辺りで失礼します。また来週です。
この番組はステートストリートインベストメントマネジメントの提供でお送りしました。